Good morning, class. It is Tuesday, probably November 7th, I think, and we are going to have another math lesson. Remember, these videos are on YouTube, guys, so if you get home and you can't figure out your homework, go to my YouTube channel, watch the lesson again, all right? Anyways, our lesson today is about multiplication patterns with whole numbers and decimals, and decimals, tenths and tenths, hundredths and tenths, hundreds and thousands, okay? So it's not really that ridiculous to think about. Easiest one to start with would be a whole number times a whole number, okay? And our answer is going to be a whole number. It's not going to be a decimal. That is because it's whole times whole. It's going to get bigger, okay? So I'm going to have a whole number as my answer. Now, whole number times a number to the tenths place, okay? That means that my answer is going to be a tenth, okay? I'm going to have my decimal in the tenths place. So what that means is I have, let's say I have 1 and 2 tenths times 3, okay? The way that I would solve this is I would multiply this by 10 so that it is a 12, and think 12 times 3. I know 3 times 2 is 6, 3 times 1 is 3. Now I'm going to divide by 10, move that decimal point over, and my answer is 3 and 6/10, okay? I only have an answer to the tenths, okay? Now if it's a whole number, if it is a whole number times a hundredth, okay, times a hundredth, my answer is going to be 100th, okay? So that means that I could have 3 and 24 hundredths times 2, okay? I would multiply this by 100 to move that decimal point over, okay? Once I do that, my problem is now 324 times 2, okay? That would be 648, but now I have to divide it by 100 and move that decimal point back over, all right? So my answer to this one would be 6 and 48 hundredths, okay? Whole times a hundredth is a hundredth. Whole times a thousandth is a thousandth, okay? Anytime I have a whole, no matter what I multiply it by, if it's a whole times a tenth, my answer is to the tenths. If it's a whole times a hundredth, it's to the hundredth. If it's a whole times a thousandth, my answer will be to the thousandths place, okay? Now, where it gets a little tricky is when I have tenths and hundredths, or tenths and tenths. When you have a number to the tenths, okay, times a number to the tenths, your product will be to the hundredths, okay? Because remember, when we multiply by parts of a whole, my answer is always going to get smaller. So in this case, my answer is going to get 2 powers of 10 times smaller. So if I have 3 and 2 tenths times 1 and 4 tenths, okay, I would multiply it by 10, multiply it by 10. This is where my hundredth is, because 10 times 10 is 100, okay? So in this case, I would have 32 because I'd move that decimal point over, and I'd have 14. When I multiply it, 4 times 2 is 8, 4 times 3 is 12. Placeholder for my tens place. 1 times 2 is 2, 1 times 3 is 3. Add it up. Okay, now because I multiplied by 10 times 10 over here, I have to divide by that, and I'm going to divide by 100. So I move my decimal point over, and my answer is 4 and 48 hundredths. So a tenth times a tenth is a hundredth, okay? Now what if I have a tenth times a hundredth? So if I have a tenth times a hundredth, okay, my answer is going to be to the thousandths, okay? So let's try one. So I know I'm not lying to you. I have 2 and 15 hundredths times 1 and 3/10, okay? So in this case, I would multiply this one by 100 because I want to move that decimal 2 places. And I'm left with, I'll work down here so I have more room, 115. And then over here I have just by 10 because I'm only going to move it 1 place, and that's 13. Then when I solve it, okay, using standard algorithm, sorry if you didn't see that, 3 times 5 is 15, carry my 1, 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 is 4, 3 times 2 is 6, placeholder, 1 times 5, 1 times 1, 1 times 2, I add it up, okay, now I'm going to take that 2,795, okay, and now because I have 100 times 10, think about it, what's 100 times 10? 100 times 10 is 1,000, okay, so I'm going to divide by 1,000, all right, move my decimal 3 places, and my answer to this problem is going to be 2,795 thousandths. So when you have a 10th times 100th, my answer is going to be 1,000, okay? All right, guys, we have our world's famous favorite way to divide, and we get to do it with decimals now, and it's going to be so exciting. Area model. So the first problem we're going to do is 7 3/10 times 6/10. I'm going to use the area model strategy to multiply. Just like I do whole numbers, I can do it the same thing with place value, where I'm breaking it apart by the place values of each of my numbers. In this case, I'm just going to have decimals, okay? So I'm going to start off with drawing my rectangle, okay? I draw my rectangle. I'm going to have 6/10 on one side, all right? And then I have 7 plus 3/10, okay? So my line goes down the middle. I have 2 boxes because I broke my one factor up into 2 place values. I did not have to break my second factor up into 2 place values. If you wanted to break it up into maybe 3/10 plus 3/10, you could, but we don't have to, okay? So I start off and I have 7 times Alright guys, we're back in business. So in my first box, I'm going to multiply 7 times 6/10. So I can either do this mentally, or if I need to set it up and solve it, I can. I know that 7 times 6 is going to be 42. So I drop my 2, carry my 4. 7 times 0 is 4. And because I have a whole number times a 10th, my answer is going to be to the 10th. Because remember in our last little part, we talked about whole number times 10th. My answer is a 10th. If I know that 6 times 7 is 42, I could just write 42 and then move my decimal over so that I have my 2 in my 10th place. Over here, I would have 6/10 times 3/10, okay? So 6/10 times 3/10. If I didn't want to try to solve that mentally, I could write it out and use standard algorithm, okay? I have a 10th times a 10th, so I know my answer is going to be 100. 3 times 6, I know it's 18. Carry your 1, and then because I know it's going to be in the hundredths place, because I have a 10th times a 10th, I'm going to move my decimal point so that my 1 and my 8 are in, the 1 is in the 10th place and the 8 is in the hundredths place. So my area model is going to look something like this, all right? 4 2/10 was my answer for my partial product of 6/10 times 7, and then 18/100 was my partial product for my answer, or my multiplication problem, 6/10 and 3/10. Now I add them up. We know how to add up decimals. Most important thing is I line up my decimals. So my problem is going to look like this, where my decimal points are in a line. Because I don't have anything in my hundredths place in 4 2/10, I'm going to make it 4 20 hundredths. So I have 8 plus 0 is 8, 2 plus 1 is 3. Drop down that decimal, and then I have 4 plus 0 is 4. So for my answer of 7 3/10 times 6/10, my answer would be 4 38/100. I think about my rule, and I have a tenth, a number with a digit in the tens place, times a number with a digit in the tens place, which means I should have something to the hundredths. So I'm following my rule, and there's my answer. Okay, so we're going to try another one. All right, guys, this one is for you to solve on your own. So I have 15 hundredths times 2 tenths. So when you fill out your area model, I'm going to keep my 2 tenths as my length. Okay, and then I'm going to split up my 15 hundredths into 1/10 plus 5 hundredths. Ooh. Okay, split down the middle. Okay, go ahead and solve it. So your problem your area model should look a little something like this. I have 2 tenths times 1/10, which means I'm going to have an answer to the hundredths place. 2 times 1 is 2. I fill in my zeros. If I have a hundredth times a tenth, that means I'm going to have an answer to the thousandths place. 2 times 5 is 10. My 0 of my 10 goes in the thousandths place. My 1 is going to go in my hundredths place. And then I'm going to fill in my zeros. Now I'm going to add them up. Now when I add my 10 thousandths, I'm actually going to drop this thousandth and just make it 1/100th, because that's going to be easier to add to 200ths. So when I add it up, 2 plus 1 is 3, then I have 0, drop down that decimal, and so my answer would be 3/100ths. So for this next one, guys, I'm going to have a lot more boxes. I have 2 4/10 times 13 hundredths. So when I drew my area model, I have 2 plus 4/10 on the top as my width, and then I have 1/10 plus 3 hundredths to show my 13 hundredths as the length. So now I'm going to start filling in my partial products for my boxes. I have a whole number times a tenth, so I know my answer is going to be in the tenths place, okay? So when I think 1 times 2 is 2, I know my answer is 2 tenths. Over here, I would have a tenth times a tenth, which means that I have an answer to the hundredths place. So I can think 1 times 4, okay, is 4, and I'm going to put that in my hundredths place and then just fill in my zeros. So 1/10 times 4/10 is 4 hundredths, okay? Then I have 3 hundredths times 2. Well, a whole number times a hundredth is a hundredth. So I'm going to get to keep my answer to the hundredths place. 3 times 2 is 6. So 3 hundredths times 2 is 6 hundredths, okay? And then last but not least, I have a hundredth times a tenth. Hundredth times a tenth is a thousandth. So I'm going to make sure that I have enough place values to the thousandths place, okay? I know 3 times 4 is 12, so I'm going to make sure my 2 is in the thousandths place, my 1 is in the hundredths place, and then I'm going to fill in my zeros, okay? Now comes adding it up. Most important rule about adding decimals is that I line up my decimal. So I have 2 tenths plus 4 hundredths plus 6 hundredths plus 12 thousandths. Oh, don't need that 0. Now I'm going to come back and put zeros in areas that I don't have any digits so that it's easier to add it up, okay? So I can look at this row and see 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 2 is 2. I know 6 plus 4 is 10, plus another 1 is 11. So I drop my 1 and I carry my 1. And then 2 plus 1 is 3. Drop down that decimal. And then I have a 0. Okay? So my end answer that I'm going to have is 312 thousandths. All right, guys, now it's your turn. You are going to be working on page 193 to 194. You're going to complete all the problems 1 through 20. Good luck.